Okay, so some given information. So 2.4 is about congruent supplements and complements. So let's take a look at this. The first piece of information is it tells me that angle 1 is supplementary to angle A. So angle 1, so if angle 1 is supplementary to angle A, that means they add up to 180. If angle A is 70, 1 has to be 110, okay, 110 degrees. Let's say angle 2 is also supplementary to angle A. So angle 2 is also supplementary to angle A. So if A is 70, angle 2 has to be 110. That's weird. I've seen that before. Then, is it true that angle 1 is going to equal angle 2, right? And let's try it with different numbers. Let's pretend hypothetically now that, I don't know, angle A is 40 degrees. If angle A is 40 and angle 1 is supplementary to it, that would have to be 140. If angle 2 is supplementary to 40, that's also 140. So it's true that those angles will always be congruent, and the reason is right here. If two angles, right here, these two angles are supplementary to the same angle. They both were supplementary to angle A. Then those two angles that you see have to be congruent to each other. They have to. Angle 1 and angle 2 have to be congruent, no matter what. If two angles are supplementary to the same angle, those two angles have to be congruent. In addition to that, if two angles, so this one has to deal with 4 angles now. So let's say A, B, C, and D. You should be writing all of these theorems down. So now this is given more information. So let's say hypothetically if angle B is congruent to angle C, let's say I also told you that angle A is supp, and again, this is our given information. Angle A is supp to angle B, and angle D is supp to angle C. Then what can we conclude? So this one says, if you have two angles that are supplementary, so if you have two angles, A and D, that are supplementary to congruent angles, notice that B and C are congruent, then the conclusion is that those original two angles have to be congruent to each other. Okay, so hypothetically again, let's say angle B is 100 degrees. If angle B is 100 degrees and they told you that B and C are congruent, C has to be 100. If A and B are supplementary, A has to be 80. If D and C are supplementary, D has to be 80. These two angles, angle A has to be congruent to angle D. And that's because if two angles are supplementary to congruent angles, and these two are congruent, then these two outside angles have to be congruent to each other. If two angles are supplementary to congruent angles, then they have to be congruent to each other. The same holds true for complementary, so not just adding up to 180, but also complementary adding up to 90. And I'm going to show you what a proof would look like. And of course, we're on these theorems, so we're going to practice these theorems. So let's go ahead and take a look at our statements and our reasons. Reason number 1, so I am going to put KM is perpendicular to MO, and that is given. My next thing is I'm going to draw a conclusion from that. So if KM is perpendicular to MO, that means I have a right angle. So angle KMO is right. My reason is if two segments are perpendicular, then they form a right angle, okay? Even more than that, because I'm looking at what I'm trying to prove. I'm trying to prove something about And if you want to highlight these angles, it's such a good idea. This is what I'm trying to prove. I'm trying to prove ROM, that this blue angle right here is somehow equal to RMO. So in my proof, I know that I need to find information out about those two blue and green angles. And so I have a right angle here, so immediately I'm going to say that, let's see, KMR, angle KMR is complementary to angle RMO. Okay, those are complementary. And how did I know that those were complementary? So if two angles form a right angle, then they are complementary. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing with my second piece of given information. So step 4, PO perpendicular to MO, given. Step 5, angle POM is right. If two segments are perpendicular, then they form a right angle. It's the same reason as number 2. Step 6, I'm going to pick out these angles now that I know. So angle POR is comp to angle ROM. And again, the reason is the same as number 3. So I just went through these again. And then I have my last given information that I'm going to write down. Angle KMR is congruent to angle POR. And that is given. I like to highlight all these angles. So I already started RMO is green. RMO is my green angle right here. So anywhere in my proof I see that. This is my green angle and my blue angle. Let's do KMR pink. So KMR, so any KMR I see in my proof, I'm going to color pink. And then I have my POR is going to be orange. POR and POR. Okay, so what can I conclude from this? I see it right here. I see that these two angles are equal to each other, okay? Hypothetically, and you're allowed to always make up one number. I'm going to make up that the pink angle is 30 degrees. I'm just making this up. If the pink angle is 30, doesn't that mean that the orange angle also has to be 30? Okay, so I'm putting 30 in here. Well, wait a minute. If the pink and the orange are 30, and those are right angles, if these two angles are 30 degrees, how big would the blue and the green have to be? Right, 60. So isn't it true then that the blue angle, angle ROM, has to equal the green angle, angle RMO? The blue angle has to equal the green angle. And why do those have to be equal to each other? I'm dealing with 4 angles, and if I'm dealing with 4 angles, I'm going to be working with this theorem right here, theorem 5. And I'm going to say, if two angles, which are the blue and the green, are complementary to congruent angles, which are the pink, the congruent angles are the pink and the orange. If two angles, the blue and the green, are complementary to congruent angles, then they are congruent. They have to be congruent, okay? I always like to go through and I put imaginary little numbers there just to make sure I've proven what I need to prove. But you can see very clearly that if those angles are both 30 and we know that they're complementary to the other angles, then whatever's left over has to be congruent to each other.